The last series that we went through was called Reformation. It was a historical, doctrinal, theological study of the Lutheran Reformation, which began 500 years ago. And so that series was so deep. There was so much content, so much history, so much doctrine, a lot of things we could draw from for those brief 3 weeks. So much so that the average sermon in the last series was just over 41 minutes long. Now, I brought that down a little bit, but I wasn't that much of a contributing factor. There was just so much stuff to go through for the Reformation series, and I heard some great feedback from some of you. Some of you were like, wow, that was amazing. That was so much, so interesting just to get these snippets of history, but also truths from the Bible, and some of you loved it, but I'm guessing some of you it was a little bit tedious to get through that much history and that much doctrine and stuff. So what I can promise you right now is this. This series is better. The whole premise of this really 3-week, again, kind of a shorter series, is simply this, that there are certain areas of your life where we can be better. And we're going to talk about 3 different areas for 3 different weeks here. Now, before I even get into the topic, pretty much every single one of you, in fact, I would argue every single one of you walked into these doors today with already something in your mind that you wish or you think should be better in your life. Some of you are thinking about that thing right now, like, oh yeah, that thing, that habit, whether I have it or not, just things could be better in general. And I think all of us want to be better at life, right? We just want to be better. So the question is, if we have this clear understanding of what should be better, but we don't get better, well, why not? I think it's because we kind of fool ourselves with some common ideas that may not be quite entirely accurate. A lot of things that we might hear, I know I've said this, maybe you have too, it's this. Everything could always be better, right? Everything could always be better. If someone walks up to me and I say, hey, how are you doing? And they said, things couldn't be better, I would be like, you're a liar. Everything could always be at least a little bit better, right? Unless your name is Jesus Christ and you're reigning in heaven right now, things could always be better this side of heaven. And I think we always throw out that phrase, well, things could always be better. Everything could always be better. And the reason why we say that or think that is because if everything could be better, that means we don't really have to try. It's like this continual effort. As much as we might try, everything could always be better. So I'm just going to be satisfied with where I'm at. The opposite of that is we say, well, everything could always be worse. We use that to comfort ourselves sometimes, maybe on a bad day. Everything could always be worse. And if I walk up to someone and I say, hey, how are you doing? And they say, man, things couldn't be worse. I'm like, well, you're kind of a liar. I don't say that, but, because unless your name is Job, things couldn't really get worse. That's kind of an inside Christian joke. Unless you're a Green Bay Packer fan, things couldn't really be worse. I picked on the Vikings last time I was up here. We kind of bounce back and forth between better and worse, better and worse. Some days we might say just things are just better. Some days we might say things are just worse. But on the whole, we're really just kind of camping out in the middle, aren't we? Everything could always be better. Everything could always be worse. And so we kind of live in that middle area, kind of bouncing back between the two. In fact, you know what? Somewhere between better and normal, or better and worse, is this area called normal. We actually love normal because normal means that we're right where we should be. We're not so up high that things are unrealistic, and we're not so down low that things are going to be really tough. Normal is where we spend most of our time. But you know what? This is a really deep thing. Do you know what normal people do? Normal people do normal things. Because normal people are content right where they're at. Now, the question is, well, why do we bring up this kind of philosophical, introspective, better, worse, normal? Why do we bring this up in the context of Scripture or in the context of church? Well, the thing is, there are some areas of your life where God does not want you to be content to be normal. Normal might be where you're at, but God says, I don't want you to be content there because He motivates and He even provides a path to be greater. And this brief 3-week series is about taking 3 general areas of life where God gives instruction and motivation on where He doesn't want us to be content with normal, but He wants to show us how certain things can be better. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. First of all, before we dive into today's content about what the big area of life, what I want you to be aware of is simply this, that you may need to let go of what's good in order to obtain what's better. And so this isn't really a series about good and bad. It's not a series about sin and righteousness. Sometimes we kind of go through those extremes. This is really a series about what you're doing right now, the good place, the normal place you're in. It might be good. It might be fine. There might not be any sin going on. But God says, let's look at things a little bit differently because maybe you don't have to settle for normal. Maybe we can get you up to better. And so in this series, we're going to look at things like at your resources, your finances. We're going to look at things like your abilities, your skills. You know, there's a normal way to go through life. But you know what? Normal usually doesn't work because normal always leads you back down to where you don't want to be. So the big thing, the big topic we're looking at today is this whole idea of time. And this is interesting because no matter who you are, what your background, no matter what privileges you were born with or born without, everyone in this world has 24 hours in a day. So the question I want to start off with is this: so how do you spend your time? And I love how we do this in the English language, where we talk about it in terms of spending things. Like if you pay attention, have you thought about that? You have to pay attention. You're giving away your time to someone. And the question is, well, what is your attention worth? Sometimes we talk about it in terms of spending time. We all have the same amount of time, spending time. We all have about 1,000 minutes of awake time every day. How do you spend your time? And the moment I ask that question, we all start to feel guilty and a little bit disturbed because it's like, yeah, things could be better, but things can also be complicated. And we'll kind of dive into this with our first fill-in in just a second. But you see all these different things we have in our life, all these different buckets, like the family time, the work time, the God time, the volunteering time, the career time, the sports time, the driving kids places time. We've got all these different times. And now I'm asking you the question, well, how do you spend your time? And you're like, oh, you mean I have to think about every single one and balance things out here and there. I just want you to recognize why this is a hard thing to think about. And it's fill-in number 1 on your sheet. The more concerns you have, the more directions you will be pulled in. And some of you are in this phase of life, maybe it's just the circumstances you were given, where you're being pulled in all sorts of different directions. If you're a college student, you've got all these things, and maybe there's a month or two where things are good, but then the finals come along, right? And you're pulled in all sorts of different directions, not to mention, job, money, paying student debt, all that stuff. If you're a parent, all these, you've got so much stuff going on, all sorts of different directions between family, career, sports, activities, extracurriculars. If you're single, you have all the time in the world. You shouldn't be complaining. But here's maybe the other side of this. Here's the other side of this. Some of you in this room, you're like, I have no time in this world. Pastor, preacher, please help me figure this out. How do I spend my time well? Other people in the room, you're thinking that you have too much time. You go through each day, maybe it's in retirement, but you go through each day and you think to yourself, how will I fill the day? Will it just be the TV? Will it just be the iPad? What is it? And so some of you are like, I just have too much time. I wish I could give some or sell some to somebody else who needs more of it. And so you can be anywhere on that spectrum, but we all should ask the question, how do you spend your time? And the reason it's complicated is because the more concerns you have, the more directions you will be pulled in. So we're going to look at a section of Scripture here where Jesus gives extraordinary clarity to why it's important, and then also how we analyze the time that we have and the time that we spend. And the section that we're going to look at is from the gospel or the account that Luke wrote of Jesus' life. What I love about Luke is that he sat down before he even wrote a letter. He sat down and he interviewed all these eyewitnesses of Jesus' life. He would sit down with them and say, tell me your story. Tell me what you experienced. What did Jesus do for you? What did he do with you? What did you hear him say? And he would take all these notes, all these notes, all these notes. And then in Luke chapter 1, as he starts to write out his account of Jesus' life, he tells you that. He says, I'm just writing down what I have learned from others. Other eyewitnesses have told me, and I'm writing down a summary of Jesus Christ and his life. And so as you look at each section of Luke, it's like, okay, who did he talk to? What did he learn? And the section we're going to look at tells us that Luke sat down with two sisters named Mary and Martha. And as Mary and Martha were telling Luke about, what they experienced and what they saw, it's almost as if they paused everything and they said, Luke, if you're going to write down an account of Jesus' life, you have to include this. It was just this crazy day where Jesus turned everything upside down on us, and we didn't know what to think. And it all had to do with how we spend our time. So to set this up a little bit more, in Luke chapter 10, Jesus had just taught the parable of the Good Samaritan. Be friendly, be good, be neighborly to everyone. Give generously to anyone, friend, enemy. And so it was this big, be good, be nice, love one another kind of thing. And so now in this next section, right after that, Mary and Martha have a chance to put that into practice for Jesus. This is what happened. Luke chapter 10, verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, they had a destination to go to. They were going to Jerusalem, but Jesus was making lots of stops along the way to teach, to preach, to heal people, all this stuff. So they're busy, they're on their way, and he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. Now, I asked this in the first service, and they kind of looked at me funny, but maybe you'll think about it seriously, because first service is just weird, right? We get the weird people in the early service. I mean, who wakes up early on Sunday morning, right? Anyway, the question I asked them, they're not weird, they're nice. They're probably watching this online, and they're like, well, I'm not weird. But anyway, some of you, sometimes, I have to stop, okay. I asked them this question. I said, if you were going to invite Jesus Christ into your house, what would you need to do? And it's not like Martha had days, weeks, months to prepare. It's not like it was on a long-range calendar. Be ready for the Son of God to spend some time in my house. It was kind of the spur of the moment. They were walking through town. They needed a place to stay, and Martha's like, I've got a house. Why don't you come stay? And so Jesus goes. What would you need to do? What would you need to prepare if the Son of God was staying in your home? Now, we'll get to what Martha was doing, but first, let's look at her sister. So Martha had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. So Mary was not content just to say, yeah, Jesus has been preaching and teaching all over the place. I can always go out and check his sermons. No, she wanted to sit down in Martha's house and listen to more from the teacher. Now, if you're Martha and Mary is just sitting there listening, sitting there doing nothing but opening her ears, while you're trying to prepare for the Son of God, what would you do? This is what Martha did. Martha was distracted. That's an interesting choice of terms, isn't it? Because if someone is coming to your house, it's not like you should be distracted by giving them a good experience, but Luke chose that word carefully. Martha was distracted by all the preparations that she had to make. The Greek word for preparations can also be translated ministry. It's where we get our word deacon from, or deaconess. She was ministering. She was tending to the needs of Jesus. She was preparing for him. It was just a little bit too late. He was already in the house. She was preparing for him. And so she was distracted by all these preparations, and in the context of this, we can safely say she was preparing a worthy meal for the Son of God. And it's probably going to be a pretty big, pretty fancy meal. So she's distracted with all these things. And I just want to pause right there, because doesn't this so well describe our life today? We have so many concerns in life that we can be pulled in all sorts of different directions. We can be so easily distracted by good things that take the place of better things. And just to be clear, Martha was not doing something bad. It's not like by her preparing for Jesus, Jesus was like, no, that's against the fifth commandment, right? No, it wasn't against a commandment. It wasn't a sin. It was something good, but it took the place of something better. What is it for you? Fill in number 2. A good thing can become a distraction. A good thing can become a distraction. I want to drive that home a little bit because for Martha, the distraction was something very good. And for you, I'm guessing there are lots of good things you do on any given day. But every single one of them has the potential to distract you from what's better. For example, for Martha, what was the distraction? Well, any ministry can be a distraction. Any service can be a distraction if it takes the place of what is better. She was serving the Son of God. That's pretty good. You can fill your calendar with all sorts of things, service projects, doing this, doing that, helping your neighbor. But you know what? Jesus is not impressed by a full calendar. He's impressed when you choose what's better. So any ministry can even become a distraction, any service project. Another thing, this is probably more common for us, any career can become a distraction. And careers are not bad. Careers are very good. In fact, God tells us many times in the scriptures to work hard, to be diligent, to use your gifts and abilities to the best that you can. And your career is a good way to take care of your needs, to take care of your family needs, to be generous with others. Careers are good, but just like any other good things, a career can become a distraction from what's better. Any hobby. Any hobby can become a distraction. Hobbies are good, but they can become a distraction. How about this? Any person can become a distraction. If you're dating someone, if you're married to someone, if you have a child, those are great people. God says love those people, but even those good people can become a distraction if they take the place of spending your time in a better way. And then finally, this last one, this is the one I wanted to write on my sheet. Any contraption can become a distraction. Any phone can become a distraction. Any app can become a distraction. Any piece of technology, any car, any boat, any cabin can become a distraction if it takes the place of something that is better. And we'll get there in just a minute. But first of all, just acknowledge you have all sorts of good things filling up your calendar. But any one of them can become a distraction if you're not careful. Now, Jesus is going to address this with Martha. He's going to say, Martha, you're distracted. He's going to address her, but I just want you to notice one thing real quick. You see, if whatever you fill in the blank, if I sat down with you this week and I said, hey, your contraption has to go in the trash. We have to get rid of your contraption. You would probably be angry, upset, because the thing that you love or the thing that you like is being taken away from you. Now, we're going to see this same thing happening with Martha. Jesus says, Martha, Martha, you're getting distracted here, and she's going to get upset. So, this is what she does. She came to Jesus and she asked, Lord, don't you care? Or Lord, can't you see what's going on here? Don't you care that my sister has left, notice all the me's and I's, my sister has left me to do the work by myself. Tell her to help me. Here's a key difference between Mary and Martha. Mary sat and listened to what Jesus wanted to tell her. Martha confronted Jesus and demanded that he change his sermon. And that's a key difference that we need to be aware of when it comes to the attitude and the things in our schedule. Is it, Jesus, you need to make more room for this? You need to make more time for this? Can you tell people to accommodate this? Or is it, Jesus, I'm just going to sit and listen to what you want to tell me? So Jesus responds in the loving way that only he could do. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you're worried and you're upset about many things. In this context, she was worried about the main dish, the side dish, the other side dish, the beverages. She was preparing all these different things for him. You have many things that are bothering you, and you're trying to get to the front of the stove and the back of the stove and the oven, microwave. Wherever her food was, she was just trying to manage it all. And she said, come on, tell my sister to help. And Jesus says, let's pause. You're upset about what? You're upset about preparing a meal in the presence of the perfect one. I do this with my kids all the time. If they're upset that we won't let them watch something on TV, they're crying, complaining, I get down, like eye level with them, and I say, are you complaining about the TV? Because we can get rid of the TV. You're worried and upset about something that you shouldn't be worried and upset about, and that's what Jesus does with Martha. You're worried. You're upset about many things, and he tries to talk her down. You're worried about many things, but even few things are needed. Few things are needed. And this is where maybe you grew up with a different Bible translation. And that phrase is in some manuscripts and not others. Long story short, it adds a little bit to the verse, but it doesn't change the meaning. Perhaps what Jesus was saying was this: you're worried about all this food you're trying to prepare, about all this stuff you're trying to get ready. It's not that complicated, Martha. Just give us some bread, give us some water. Bonus would be some sort of meat, but we don't need that. Just bread and water. We just need a few things. You're so worried. You're so upset. Only a few things are needed. And then it's almost like he pauses. It's like, well, what really is needed here? What is needed? A few things are needed for a meal, but one thing is needed for your salvation. Martha, you're going crazy preparing things for me, but I need to prepare you for something. So he continues like this: few things are needed, indeed only one. And you might be thinking, okay, what is this one thing that you're getting at? And we'll get there. But I just want you to pause right here, because you have so many concerns in your life. And they're all taking you in different directions. Now, what would it mean if God could step into your life and say, you're worried about all sorts of different things, you just need to focus on one thing that will give you unity of vision and purpose for all of them? What if God could simplify your time so that you don't have to figure out 15 different buckets and how to make them all equal? What if it was just one? Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that bring a certain sense of joy and peace? In fact, I don't even want to tell you what that one thing is quite yet. I just want you to think about what that would mean. Fill in number 3. God alone can align your many concerns behind a single purpose. You have all these things, but I just want you to focus on one thing that's needed. Only He can align a person's life in that kind of way. And you know what? Mary was onto something that Martha wasn't. In fact, when Jesus continues the conversation, he says, Martha, you've got it all wrong. There's only one thing needed. And she's like, well, if you're going to have a meal, how can you only have one thing? And Jesus is like, no, it's not about the meal. In fact, he points to Mary. He says, Mary has chosen what is better. A better way to spend time, a better way to view time. You see, the normal is what you're in right now, Martha. Right now, you're in the normal, and things are getting worse because you're thinking like a normal person. You see, the way normal people think is we just need more to make things better. You just need more time, more help, more people. But Jesus says, no, that's normal thinking, and normal isn't working. There's a better way, and Mary has found it. Mary has chosen what's better, and it won't be taken away from her. I'll have no part in taking Mary away from what she has chosen to do. And here's a quick takeaway. This isn't on your sheet, but just think about this. When we think about time, we often think, I just need more time, and then things would be better. But Jesus redirects it a different way. He says, really, when it comes to better time, it's not about circumstances, it's more about choices. If you want to be better with your time, spend time better. It's not that you're, at the risk of losing or changing your circumstances, or that you have to have your circumstances changed around you. It's more about the choices you make. And Mary chose better. And the thing that he would have us walk away with is this too. Would you also consider today to choose better when it comes to the time God gives you? Now I'm going to tell you why this was important for Mary and Martha, and then we'll wrap it up with you. So Mary and Martha were sisters. Jesus was in their home. He had a chance to impact them, to talk to them. But you see, Mary and Martha weren't the only siblings in their family. They also had this brother. And in a matter of weeks, maybe months, their brother would get very sick after this event took place. Their brother would get sick to the point where no doctor, no medicine seemed to be working. So Mary and Martha sent word to Jesus, and they said, Jesus, you need to come back to our house. You need to heal our brother, whose name is Lazarus. He's sick, and if you don't get here, he'll be gone. So Jesus gets the word that Lazarus, their brother, is sick. And you know what he does with that? Quick side note. You might think that Mary and Martha, after welcoming Jesus, and especially Mary, after sitting at the feet of Jesus, you might assume, well, her life is just going to be better now, right? Her circumstances are going to be better. But that's not what happened. See, Jesus got word that Lazarus was sick, and the first thing he did was to sit around for 2 days before he set out to see them. 2 days. He knew that Lazarus was sick. And you know what he thought about that? You know what he thought when he heard that it was now too late and Lazarus was dead? What Jesus thought was, good. Their life did not turn out better. But here's the point. When they spent time at Jesus' feet, they were a lot better at life. Jesus finally made it to where Lazarus was, and by the time he got there, Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. He walks up, Martha runs out to him, crying, sobbing, Jesus, if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. Things did not turn out better. Mary comes out. Mary is crying. She's sobbing. She says the exact same thing. Jesus, if you had been here, our brother would still be alive. And then all of her friends come out. They're sobbing. They're crying. And Jesus, as he surveys the scene of all this sorrow, he wept. He was deeply moved because time was never intended to be taken away from God's creatures. That was not a part of his plan. Time was supposed to be this eternal thing, to live in harmony with one another, to serve the Lord with gladness, to have all these things. But when time is cut short, that breaks the heart of God. So as Mary and Martha prepared for this, Jesus, again, weeks later, as he's in their home, he says, Martha, Martha, you're concerned about all this food, about all this stuff. Your heart's in the wrong place. There's one thing that you need to keep in focus, and that is me. Sitting down at the feet of Jesus and listening to his word may not make your life better, but it will make you better at life. When Jesus arrived on the scene and Lazarus was dead, Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though he dies. Mary, Martha, do you believe this? And they said, yes, we believe this. We know that death is a temporary thing. They knew their brother Lazarus would rise from the dead. They just didn't anticipate it being so soon. See, listening to Jesus doesn't necessarily make your life better, but it will make you better at life. There is a joy and a peace in knowing that the time that sin took away from us has now been restored to us through the Son of God. He entered time from heaven to live among us, to dwell among us, and to restore what was lost from sin and death. And when you sit at his feet, imagine what he can do, both in addition to forgiving you, then to also guiding you, to look at time and the way you spend it a little bit differently. Thousands of years ago, they kind of put that concept into a song. It's in Psalm number 84. This is what they said. It said, better is one day in your courts, God, than 1,000 days elsewhere. We already said that there's about 1,000 waking minutes in a day, so let's put that into context. Better is 1 minute sitting at your feet than spending 1,000 minutes, an entire day, doing something else. What I want to challenge you today to do is to simply believe that. Do you believe that 1 minute with God is better than 1,000 minutes doing whatever else you could possibly do in a day? When you consider who Jesus is and what he can do, the answer has to be yes. Yes. Now, as far as application, you might be thinking, yeah, but I've got so many different concerns. I'm being pulled in so many different directions. What does this mean for me? And here's just one thing I want to hammer home real quick. This is number 4 on your sheet. Time spent with Jesus is never lost. It's not like you're going to lose time by sitting down with Jesus and listening to him. When you're talking to someone at the end of their life, it's not like they say, I regret all the moments I spent with Jesus. I wish I would have spent more time with my boat. No. Never do you see someone saying, man, I just lost time there. I just lost time when I was studying the Bible, when I was reading the Bible. All those moments of meditation, lost. No. Time spent with Jesus is never lost. Quite the contrary. Time spent with Jesus redirects your view of time. And it empowers you and it guides you to make better use of the way you spend your time. So the application, your homework for this week, is actually a continuation from last week. Last week, when we ended our extremely deep and wide series on the Reformation, the homework we sent out was a 30-day Bible reading plan. And so for every day, there's a chapter or a couple sections from the Bible that you can read through. And so we kind of gave that as the assignment because time spent in the Word is so, so important. But here's what I know about me and probably about most of you too. When you just sit down and try to read the Bible, it can be very difficult. Like for me, if I just sit down, I wake up, grab my coffee, just sit down, open up my Bible. Okay, it's Mark chapter 4 today, so I open up Mark chapter 4. I read like 3 sentences, and then my mind is in 10 different directions already. And I'm thinking about different things. And this is one of the most common things I hear from people. Well, what's so hard about reading the Bible? And it's like, well, it's hard to understand, it's hard to focus, my mind's distracted. So I'm going to back up from what we gave you last week. If you tried that 30-day Bible reading plan and you got through a few days and you just found it hard to sit down and open the Bible, I want to speak to you real quickly because I believe what you do the 5 or 10 minutes before you open the Bible is just as important as the act of opening it. And if you're having trouble focusing, this next part's for you. I've got 3 things here. Before you open the Bible, you need to, number 1, write down what's on your mind. For me, this is just as simple as writing down a list of things I need to do for the day or things that I've got coming up that I'm kind of thinking about. What's on your mind? Write it down because when you write it down, you give yourself permission to not think about it for a little bit. And as you write it down, that's your way of telling God what's on your mind. God, I'm here. I want to read your word, but first, here's what's on my mind. And you'll be amazed at how much this frees up your mind to focus on whose feet you're sitting at. And then once you write down your things, you might think of all the things you've got going on. The second thing that'll probably naturally happen is that you will think back to what you did yesterday or think back to what you did the week before. And specifically as you think back, you need to think about the ways you have failed. In context with God, God, you want me to be kind, generous, patient, understanding. You want me to be self-controlled, alert, all these things. And God, I have failed you at this one, and this one. And yesterday, it was especially this one. I have failed you, but I know as I sit here, I'm forgiven. I am your dearly loved child. And nothing will take that away from me. I confess my sins, and I know I have received your forgiveness. Because I have a Savior who lived and died and rose again for me. And you dwell, you think back in that grace of God, and you approach God as his child, dearly loved. And once you've written down and once you've thought back, this third step is you need to look ahead. Look ahead to what you want to change in your life. The Bible, Scripture, the Apostle Paul gives this wonderful list of fruits of the Spirit. Peace, love, patience, gentleness, self-control, all these different things that are fruits of the Spirit. And you're like, God, I'm really struggling with this one right now. And because it's a fruit of the Spirit, I cannot produce it on my own. So Father in heaven, I want you to work in me today, the fruit of patience, the fruit of gentleness, the fruit of self-control. I've tried my best. I can't do it. So I want you to work in me and through me. And then you're ready to listen. It's then that you've given your cares and concerns to God and you've dwelled on his grace and now you've identified what you want him to do in your life, that you're ready to open up and listen to your Father in heaven speak to you. Because you know what? Just like Mary and Martha, he needs to prepare you for something coming up. Maybe it's something related to your time. Maybe it's something related to relationship. Maybe for all of us, it's simply just being ready for the day we go to heaven. Time spent with Jesus is never lost. time spent with Jesus gives extraordinary clarity to what comes ahead. And this is his chance to sit down with you and prepare you. So in the context of this series, I believe that if we can get this one right, if we can take our time, instead of seeing so many different concerns pulling us in so many different directions, what if we just let God align all of our concerns in one direction, to see things as he sees them? All we need to do in life is love God and love our neighbor because he first loved us. And so as you look at your different things, this will provide extraordinary clarity to simply love as you've been loved. And next week, we're going to take this a little bit deeper, a little bit further. We're going to talk about how God has a plan for your resources, your money, your stuff. And you know what? The normal way of approaching that stuff just isn't working, is it? So next week, we'll see how God gives extraordinary clarity then also to the way we view money and the way we use money. And again, the answer is not just to get more of it. Let's close this message with a prayer. Dear Father in heaven, you've given each of us the gift of time. Each of us has 24 hours in a day. Each of us has an opportunity to reflect on who you are and what you've done for us. And we lay before you our shortcomings and how we've lost time, how we've not been faithful with it, how we've wasted it. There's always things we can do better. But we believe that you were perfect for us. I pray that you would redeem what time you've given us and that you would help direct us to honor you and glorify you with it. Encourage all of us to be able to sit down at the feet of your Son, to simply listen to what he wants to prepare us for next. I ask all those things in his name. Amen. We'll continue here.